Today I'm going to be taking you guys through the process of how to create drum patterns for your lo-fi beats. Lo-fi has its own unique set of challenges that you need to understand. So I'm going to show you guys what these concepts are in order to help you make better lo-fi beats. So let's get into it. When it comes to creating a lo-fi drum pattern or any hip-hop drum pattern in general, what I like to do is start off by putting a kick on the first beat here and taking my snare and putting a snare on the second and fourth beat. And I'll repeat the same for the second bar here. As I mentioned in my prior video on trap drum patterns, this is what most hip-hop beats use as a basic drum structure, so it's good for us to use this as a starting point. This creates a framework for us to start building around now. With lo-fi, compared to other hip-hop subgenres, the instrumentation is relatively minimal, so there's going to be a lot more focus put on the drums. Next up, once we have our basic framework ready, what I like to do is move on to the hi-hats. I like to use the hi-hats as an opportunity to create an interesting rhythm, so I'm going to be playing them off-grid, unquantized. I did a video on quantization a couple of weeks ago, so take a look at that video if this whole topic of quantizing confuses you. Now, as you can see down here, I kept the velocity varied. This is something that I like to do in order to help create a more live, organic feel to the drum pattern. Just helps make the beat a little bit more interesting. Now from here, I'm going to move back into the kicks and start adding additional kicks into the beat. Now with the kicks, you can do the exact same thing. You can take them off the grid to help create a more live feel. Again, I'd recommend watching the video on quantization, but if quantizing in general is something that you're uncomfortable with, I'm going to show you guys another technique here that you can use. What I'm going to do is duplicate the kick that I have here, and now I'm going to cut and paste some of the kicks that I added in here and add it to the new layer here. So let's say I took all these notes and I made them a lot more quantized. So now that I have my secondary pattern of kicks playing, you guys can see I have this pattern here of my initial kicks, and I have this layer here of my secondary kicks that are going to be playing a little bit differently. This gives me the opportunity to go in and manipulate my secondary layer of kick just to be a little bit different than the first. So with the secondary layer of kicks, I'm going to go in and change the ADSR a little bit. There's no rhyme or reason to this. The intention here is just to take this kick and make it different than my first one. If you guys remember, I initially had this kick when it was unquantized, a little bit off grid over here. But to me, when these kicks were completely quantized, it felt a little bit too rigid. And that's the reason why I went into the ADSR and I turned the attack up a little bit. So now instead of the peak of the kick hitting right on the grid here, it's going to hit a little bit later and it's just going to give that unquantized feel to the kick. So this is a tip that you can do if you're not very comfortable with quantization. Again, this is just another way to help our drums just be a little bit more interesting. So let's do the exact same thing with the snares. I'm going to add another layer of snares in. So I'm just going to duplicate this layer here. So with these snares, I'm going to keep them as they are. I'm just going to turn the velocity down a little bit. Additionally, what I can do is play around with the pitch of these snares. So I can bring it down a note. It just helps color these snares a little bit different than our initial set of snares. Additionally, I can go in and tune the snare over here just to be a little bit more granular with it. Instead of jumping whole semitones, I can go somewhere in between. Again, these are techniques that I can also use with the kicks or the hi-hats if I wanted to. So for example, if I went to duplicate the hi-hat layer, I just took random notes here and there, let's say. And now I can play around with the pitch of the secondary layer here of hi-hats. With hi-hats though, they are very sensitive when it comes to pitch shifting. For example, if I went up an entire note, you guys can hear it just sounds completely off. It just doesn't feel like it fits with the other hi-hats now, so I'd recommend being a little bit more subtle when it comes to pitch shifting with hi-hats. Another technique that we can use is pitch modulation. So for example, if I go into my main snare here, I choose Control, Channel Pitch. What I'm going to do is slightly change the pitch of each of these snares around. Again, you don't want to overdo this. You can really screw up your lo-fi drum pattern if you get too extreme with it. So that's something that you don't want to do. Just keep it relatively subtle, I'd say. Next up, I'm going to add an open hi-hat to this drum pattern here. Again, there's no rhyme or reason to this, just wherever it feels natural. What I like to do with open hi-hats is make sure that I enable the envelope here just so I can control when the open hi-hat starts and finishes. If your open hi-hat feels out of place, it may be because you need to tune it. For example, the one that I chose here, I pitched it down like 500 cents. Originally, this is how it would have sounded. It just feels like it doesn't really match the character of my original hi-hats. The original hi-hats here, they're very dusty sounding. They feel like very lo-fi. There's not much high-end polish to them. So if I add an open hi-hat here that has a lot of high-end presence like this one here, it just doesn't really feel like it fit in. So what I did was I went and pitched it down a bunch just so it does have that sort of grimy, dusty feel like the other hi-hats did. So if you run into this problem, I'd recommend trying pitching it up and down, and if that doesn't work, maybe just try selecting an entirely different new open hi-hat. I made a video a while back on how to create your own boom bap drum kit where I covered these types of principles of character and making sure all the sounds mesh together, so watch that video if this is something that troubles you. So as of right now, this drum pattern sounds pretty good to me. From here, what I can do is start layering other drum sounds underneath the ones that I already have. For example, here's a layer of shakers that are going to sit beneath the hi-hats. And here I added an additional layer of snares to sit behind my main snares. You guys can see when I go into my snares, I also played around with the velocity of these, again, just to help create some variation in the beat. And obviously you can do the exact same thing with the kicks, but this is starting to get into more sound design area, which I've already covered in past videos, so we're just going to move on from here. Now during the hook of the beat, what I like to do is make the drum pattern a little bit more dense. Again, lo-fi can be very minimal, so adding more drums is a good way to help bring more energy to the beat. So in the end, if you find that your drum pattern doesn't sound all that great, the reason why might be because sound selection. In lo-fi, making sure that you select sounds that fit the overall aesthetic of a lo-fi beat is very important. For example, here's how the beat would sound with completely different drums. I kept the pattern the complete same, but the aesthetics of the drums are different, and you can hear the beat just doesn't sound all that great, and it just doesn't feel like a lo-fi beat anymore. This is why sound selection is super important when it comes to creating your own lo-fi drum patterns. It's half the battle, really. And if this is something that you have trouble with, I'd really recommend watching the video that I made a while back. I'll link it in the description box below. I think that'll really help you guys. So these are the tips and tricks that I like to use whenever I'm coming up with my lo-fi drum pattern. If you guys have tricks of your own, please leave a comment down below. Let me know. Again, my free drum kit is available in the description box below. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys next Tuesday.